Daniela, Bonita Bermúdez, Carolina, Puerto Rico,
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're gonna start it off with the ring return of MJ Akhmadaliev, Unified Super Bantamweight Champion MJ Akhmadaliev, who took on Japan's own Ryosuke Iwasa.
Mutajan dominated the fight.
Now, both of these guys had been out of action for a while, both Ryosuke Iwasa and MJ Akhmadaliev. Ryosuke had last fought in December of 2019, whereas MJ last fought in January of 2020. But you never would have known it how easily MJ Akhmadaliev took control of this match and dominated the fight. I want to say that salvo at the beginning of the 5th round.
Those shots.
Those combinations. Those clean punches. Ryosuke mounted very little in terms of a response to the come-forward aggression and clean punching of MJ Akhmadaliev. There were actually 2 salvos in that 5th round.
2 very punishing salvos.
To where Ryosuke is getting hit. He's getting hit clean, and he's getting hit often, and he's forcing the ref to give the action a closer look, because if this guy don't do nothing, he's going to have to stop this thing. And that's exactly what he did. MJ didn't look like a guy who was coming right off of a year layoff. He really didn't. He didn't seem to miss a beat at all. He looked great.
But Iwasa didn't.
I saw some gripes about the stoppage coming a bit too early. There were those out there who felt that Iwasa still had a couple more rounds left in him. He could have went on, but we can't forget about what happened with Patrick Day, what happened with Maxim Dadashev.
No, you can't see a brain bleed.
Perhaps on the face of it, Ryosuke Iwasa looked like he could go on, but who knows? I mean, who knows in the moment? Who knows for sure? What we do know is that the guy was getting hit clean. He's getting hit clean, and he was getting hit often.
I had no issues with the stoppage.
I had no issues with the stoppage with those things in mind. I have seen fights stopped for less. I have seen fights stopped for less punishment than what Iwasa was suffering at the hands of MJ Akhmadaliev. The Demetrius Andrade versus Artur Akavov fight almost immediately comes to mind, and I understand what the rhyme and the reasoning for that stoppage was, that Artur looked like he had more in the tank. It looked like he could have got on, but throughout the entirety of the fight, his inability to deal with Demetrius Andrade's jab, to prevent it from landing. There's just no need for the guy to
suffer,
be out there taking more punishment than he should take when it's clear he can't do nothing with the guy.
And I think that thought process applied here.
By the time the 5th rolled around, MJ Akhmadaliev had already taken control of the fight with Iwasa, and at the very beginning of that round, he unleashed a hellacious combination. A lot of clean shots on Ryosuke Iwasa that he wasn't responding to, that he wasn't doing all that much about, except absorbing. And this continued throughout the course of the match. So I understood the referee's need to close the show.
End it early.
Put a stop to this, because Iwasa, he's not doing nothing aside from getting nailed.
Wasn't the best stoppage I've ever seen.
But it wasn't the worst either. With that, MJ Akhmadaliev successfully defended both his IBF and WBA Super Bantamweight titles. Former Unified Champion Daniel Roman, post-fight, immediately took to calling out MJ Akhmadaliev for a rematch that I don't think is going to happen.
Didn't he cross over to the PBC side of the street?
Yes, he did. Sometime after losing his 2 world titles to MJ Akhmadaliev. Now, why he did that, I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if Matchroom released him from his contract as a result of losing the belts. I'm not sure if it was because he wasn't happy over there. He wasn't happy with that situation. I don't know what the specifics are as to why Daniel Roman made the decision to cross over to the PBC side of things and start asking for a rematch with MJ. You wanted to ask for a rematch with MJ. Ideally, you would have done that post-fight. He had that fight with MJ in January of last year. And, he didn't return to action till September on the undercard of the Charlo Brothers' doubleheader. He came back against Juan Carlos Payano. By that time, he was in bed with the PBC. And since then, we've not seen all that much of Daniel Roman, aside from Daniel taking to social media to complain about him not having a fight date.
That was back in February.
February of this year.
It's strange to see him asking for a rematch after all this time.
It's not like he can't ask for a rematch after all this time. He can. It's his prerogative. It's just that I don't recall Daniel Roman being all that vocal the last couple of months about wanting to lock horns with MJ a second time. Especially since on that side of the street, the side of the street that he's on, the PBC side of things,
There's 2 world champions over there.
Stephen Fulton, newly crowned WBO champion, Stephen Fulton, who holds the WBO, and Luis Neri, reigning WBC champion Luis Neri, who's supposed to be locking horns with Brandon Figueroa in the very near future. No word on when exactly that's supposed to happen, but I vaguely recall some rumors, some rumblings detailing a match between them.
I kind of figured they'd make Roman versus Fulton.
I kind of figured that what they do is stage a mini tournament between those 4 guys. You have Luis Neri take on Brandon Figueroa, and while that's going on, you have Stephen Fulton take on the former unified champion, Daniel Roman.
That's what I thought they were going to do.
I don't know, maybe they still will, though. Daniel Roman taking to social media to call out MJ Akhmadaliev gives me the impression that if that is a plan for the future, it must not be a plan for the immediate future.
Otherwise, why would Danny be calling out MJ?
MJ, who looked sensational after over 12 months of inactivity, as opposed to Daniel Roman, who fought 2 times last year, though I have to say, I didn't like how he looked against Juan Carlos Payano. Absolutely no wow factor whatsoever in that performance. Bear in mind that Juan Carlos Payano was coming off of not only a year of inactivity ahead of that fight with Daniel Roman, he was coming off a loss to Luis Neri. Yet in the fight, Danny
couldn't put him away.
Bear in mind he was coming off a knockout loss to Luis Neri at 118 pounds, a 9th round knockout loss to Luis Neri. He subsequently moves up from 118 to 122 pounds, takes on Daniel Roman over a year later, and goes the distance with Daniel.
It's not a good advertisement for Daniel.
It's not a good advertisement for Daniel or Luis Neri, who needed 9 rounds to stop Juan Carlos Payano, whereas Naoya Inoue needed just 1. Stops the guy off the first clean 1-2 that lands. I don't know if that's a bad advertisement for them or a great advertisement for him, but either way, Daniel Roman didn't impress me in his last outing.
But I wouldn't mind seeing him get a rematch with MJ.
Wouldn't mind seeing that take place at all. It's just that I don't think it's going to take place. I don't think it's going to happen. He's on the PBC side of things. And unless he's ready to cross the street and go over there to Matchroom for at least a one-off to take on MJ Akhmadaliev again, I don't see the rematch happening. I don't think there's going to be a second fight. That being said, yesterday's card was a very entertaining, albeit novel, card from out of Uzbekistan involving the Uzbeks.
Madrimov, Gayasov, Akhmadaliev.
All those guys. It was a great showing for MJ. But if you ask me what the future holds for him, I don't think a rematch with Daniel Roman is in the cards. Quite honestly, I don't think unification matches are in the cards for him either. Chalk it up to the politics of boxing. And finally, we come to yesterday's card via Top Rank, involving the reigning WBO super featherweight champion Jamel Herring and the then challenger Carl Frampton. In so many words, I went with Jamel Herring to win the fight, and he exceeded my expectations.
Got a big fight tomorrow. I might still do a breakdown video for it, though it's probably just going to be me repeating myself, because I said that I've already said tactically, I just don't see what Carl can do to beat Jamel Herring, so long as Jamel stays on his jab. If he stays on his jab, Carl don't get close enough to this guy to hit him with anything. So for Carl, it's a question of closing the gap, slipping the jab, and working Jamel Herring's body. That game plan is a very obvious game plan, but it's going to boil down to physicality,
In the build-up leading up to Herring versus Frampton, well-known boxing scribe Steve Kim asked the boxing community at large who they think was going to win the fight. In so many words, I went with Jamel Herring behind a judicious jab, because distance control was going to be pivotal in this fight.
And I felt that Jamel could control the distance.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. how Carl Frampton looked against Tyler McCreary isn't necessarily an insight into how he'd look with Jamel, because even though Tyler's statuesque for the weight, the same way that Jamel is a southpaw. And if I'm being honest, Jamel is a cut above Tyler McCreary.
He's a better boxer than that guy.
From where I was sitting, even though Carl looked good against young Tyler, who's tall for 130 the same way that Jamel is tall for 130, even though Carl looked good against that guy, at least from where I was sitting, that wasn't going to translate into Carl looking good against Jamel, because it's a different fight. Against a more proven fighter, I might add. I remember all the harsh criticisms and quips that were levied against Jamel for how he looked in the Oquendo fight. And then, like now, I stand by my original assertions. I think many of those individuals were being short-sighted in their criticisms, overly harsh, and they weren't factoring in that, that fight got postponed, 2-3 times?
Yeah.
Jamel Herring had come down with COVID.
Oquendo was deliberately trying to headbutt him.
I didn't forget what the critics were saying after that fight. Oh, it's all cake and confetti now that Jamel Herring has successfully defended his WBO title, but I didn't forget that there were a lot of people accusing Jamel of quitting. That wasn't the view from where I was sitting. From where I was sitting, not only did the constant hiccups and snafus in association with the Oquendo fight, not only did those hiccups manifest in the performance, I felt that there was a lot that people were overlooking in reference to that fight.
There was.
And that performance. And that performance would not translate into a Carl Frampton victory.
Seems time has proven me right.
Because from the moment that Herring versus Frampton became a talking point, from the moment that fight was proposed, from the moment that fight became a thing, I figured Carl's gonna have a hell of a hard time getting close to Jamel, because not only is Jamel the more statuesque fighter in the fight, a guy who's big for 130, but he's a southpaw and he's a jabber.
He is.
Very good jabber, I might add. That was evident in the Masayoshi Ito fight, where Jamel Herring became the WBO's super featherweight champion. This guy knows how to use his lead hand and establish distance control. And for a little guy like Carl, well,
If he was able to keep a big guy like Masayoshi Ito out.
Masayoshi, who's a big guy as far as 130-pounders go, if he was able to keep him out, it's going to be that much easier to keep a smaller man in Carl Frampton out, because it's up to Carl to apply the pressure. It's up to Carl to close the gap. It's up to Carl, it would be up to Carl, to navigate under and around that jab to get close enough to Jamel to start landing body shots. And that's a tall order. That's a tall ask, because not only is Jamel Herring an educated jabber, he's an educated mover. All he's really got to do is take a half step back or move laterally to get out of Carl's striking distance.
That's it.
And while this is going on, he can line up Carl for either straight left hands or uppercuts. And that's exactly what we saw throughout the course of yesterday's fight. Very early in the fight, you saw the effect that Jamel Herring's straight shots had on Carl.
Snapping his head back.
I also have to add that Carl Frampton's feet didn't look the best. I think that there was a slip that could have been ruled a knockdown before there actually was a knockdown in the match.
I think so.
There was a slip there that looked to have happened off a right hook from Jamel Herring, if my memory serves me. Carl's feet,
They didn't seem quite under him.
I mean, it really was an awkward situation for Carl, because he had to try to make this a fight in order to win it. And that was up to him. It was all on him to close the gap on Jamel Herring, get close to him, stay with him, and stay on him. And that's a very difficult thing to do against the naturally bigger man who has the option of either taking a half step back to line you up for a straight shot, moving laterally to get out of your way, or tying you up. And if the little guy does make his way past the jab, all you gotta do is wrap your arms around the guy and smother his work. Suddenly he can't do nothing. Suddenly he can become quite frustrated, start making mistakes. What really took me by surprise wasn't Jamel Herring's dominance from the outside, but his dominance on the inside as well, physically overpowering Carl Frampton, landing good shots on the inside.
Uppercut.
He had to weather a cut in this fight.
For those who felt that he might quit.
For those who felt, based on the Oquendo fight, that Jamel would be lacking the intestinal fortitude to successfully defend his WBO title, I fucking told you guys not to read too much into that fight. I fucking told you guys one don't translate into the other. The Oquendo fight ain't got a goddamn fucking thing to do with the Carl Frampton fight, unless Carl Frampton makes it his mission to headbutt Jamel Herring.
Because that's what Oquendo did.
Scary left counter uppercut from Jamel Herring that spelled the end for Carl Frampton. I figured it's going to be all downhill from here. the way that Carl went down. He really wasn't taking those punches well. I think that Jamel was too big and too strong for Carl Frampton's ambitions to become a 3-division champion.
Frampton's corner was right to throw the towel.
Several straight left hands, uppercuts, body shots, 2 knockdowns later, I think that Frampton's corner made the right call, made the right decision in throwing the towel in on this one. There's no sense in Carl taking more punishment than he needs to in a fight that clearly got away from him, quite honestly. A fight that he was never in because it was never a fight. It was dominance from the opening round to the finish from Jamel Herring. Congratulations to him. With that, Shakur Stevenson post-fight immediately has begun to apply the pressure. We all knew that young Shakur was keeping a close eye on this fight, waiting for the winner to emerge. We know who that winner is. The winner is Jamel Herring, who young Shakur immediately took to calling out post-fight. There's a 30-day negotiation period in play as we speak for Jamel and young Shakur to reach a deal. Otherwise, the fight goes to a purse bid, as this is a mandated title fight, a mandatory title defense, whereas Carl was a voluntary, not a mandatory. This situation is going to need reconciliation and truth. I'm okay either way, because a lot of people feel that Jamel, maybe he wants to unify with Oscar Valdez, the newly crowned WBC champion, more than he wants to take on young Shakur. I understand where those people are coming from. I get it. From where I'm sitting, I'm okay with either outcome. I'm okay with either scenario. If by some chance a situation can be negotiated, be finagled, to where Jamel Herring goes straight into a unification match with Oscar, I'm all for it. If he ends up defending his title against his mandatory challenger, young Shakur Stevenson, I'm okay with that too. I will say that there's a lot more prestige and a lot more money associated with a Valdez fight than a Stevenson fight, though all the same. As a boxing fan, I'm okay with either of those matchups. No complaints from me.
And I can't fault Shakur for shooting his shot.
What would you have the young man do? Have him sit on his hands, remaining silent, allowing the gravy train to go by?
Choo-choo.
He wants an opportunity to show his shit. He wants an opportunity to fight the best. And Jamel Herring has effectively established himself as one of the best fighters at 130 pounds. All Shakur Stevenson wants to do is take him on. For all of you out there who say that Shakur Stevenson hasn't fought anyone solid yet, well, that's what he's trying to do. So I won't fault him for that. Whether or not he gets that opportunity is anybody's guess, because truthfully, a Valdez versus Herring fight is a bigger fight than a Herring versus Stevenson fight. However, there is more upside in young Shakur Stevenson than the other aforementioned 2 fighters.
He's young.
He's a young, hungry lion, this kid. And I don't actually know what's going to happen here. I don't. For Top Rank as a promotional company, Herring versus Valdez is a bigger fight for them, a bigger moneymaker than Herring versus Stevenson, even though they are invested in Shakur Stevenson. But here today, Shakur, he's not a moneymaker yet.
They've always had a way with the WBO.
Is Shakur stepping aside even a feasible scenario at this point? Well, there's only one way to find out.